The sun dipped low over the horizon, painting the sky with fiery oranges and deep purples, as the last light of day illuminated a lone farmer standing among his fields. He looked out over the crops, a sea of green swaying gently in the evening breeze that had once been the pride of his life. But this was no ordinary night. It was the calm before a storm, both literally and metaphorically. Just as the first stars twinkled into view, a distant rumble shattered the peace. A dark cloud formed on the edge of the horizon, drawing closer with every passing moment. But this wasn't just any thunderstorm. Whispers of injustice rode on those winds. A giant corporation was set to roll through his land, armed with promises of progress and technology. They thought this would be an easy job, but they underestimated the resolve of one man. As the rain began to fall, each drop hitting the dry earth felt like a warning. The farmer, whose hands were calloused from years of toiling under the sun, was no stranger to struggle. He had faced drought, low prices, and even the heartbreak of losing his crops to a late frost. But as he gazed upon the approaching machines that glinted ominously in the fading light, he realized this battle would be different. It wasn't just about him, it was about the very soul of the land. The farmer had watched friends sell their land, eyes heavy with defeat. He remembered old Mr. Thompson, who had once shared tales of harvests so bountiful they echoed in the laughter of gatherings. Now Mr. Thompson's property lay empty, a ghost of past glories. It struck a chord deep within the farmer's heart, warning him that complacency could lead to a similar fate. With the air thickening and rain beating down, he decided it was time to act. A flicker of defiance ignited in him, a burning desire to protect everything he held dear. Walking into his farmhouse, he grabbed an old, worn-out flannel shirt off the rack, a battle uniform of sorts. As he moved, thoughts flashed through his mind: his family, the history written in the soil, and the legacy he was determined to uphold. The phone rang shrilly, slicing through the tension. It was his brother, Mark, voice heavy with concern. "They're coming tomorrow, you know." "It's all set. I won't let it happen," the farmer replied, his voice steady. "Are you sure they're serious about this?" "I don't care," he declared, a fire welling inside him. As night fell, the farmer gathered tools, a battered hoe, heavy-duty stakes, and a handful of homemade signs. He knew that words alone wouldn't be enough to protect his land. He had to stir emotions, to rally not just himself, but his community. Morning came with storm clouds still looming overhead. As he worked, passers-by slowed their cars, staring at the man who had decided to stand firm against the corporate tide. Some looked skeptical, others nodded in agreement, but most gave him mostly silent applause for having the guts to fight back. As the machines rolled in, large and intimidating, he felt a surge of emotions. Fear mingled with hope, and the weight of years of legacy pressed upon his shoulders. The giant corporation's crew emerged, clad in their crisp uniforms and armed with shovels and heavy equipment. They looked at him like he was an insect, something insignificant to be brushed aside. The lead operator, a man with cold blue eyes, approached. "Sir, this land has been bought." His words dripped with condescension. But the farmer stood tall, the rain beating on his brow like armor. "You may have the paperwork, but this land has been in my family for generations." The operator chuckled, a hint of amusement beside impatience. His words lingered in the air as the engine roared to life, a terrifying growl that echoed through the valley. Every vibration resonated in the farmer's chest. Would this be the day the heart of his home was ripped out? Suddenly, something extraordinary happened. One by one, neighbors began to appear, drawn by the sight of their fellow farmer standing tall. They stood behind him, arms crossed, their bodies forming a human barricade. A local father with two small boys placed his hand on the farmer's shoulder, eyes blazing with shared anger. "Not today," he said, his voice steady. Others followed: the single mother who had once borrowed a cup of sugar, the old couple who had lived down the street for decades, even the young girl who used to help him on the farm with dreams of becoming a farmer herself. Each filled the space, lending their presence and their strength. Together, they created a wall of determination, a chorus of united voices ready to face the storm. The operator, seeing this wave of community support, shifted uneasily, the facade of indifference cracking. "You can't stop progress," he said, somewhat less confidently. The farmer, feeling truly energized for the first time, replied, "Progress isn't just about machines and money." With that, the neighbors cheered, their voices harmonizing into a powerful declaration. The loud cheer became a living entity, echoing through the fields, shaking the earth beneath them. The operator's eyes darted around, finally seeming to grasp the gravity of the situation. "Let me remind you, I have the law on my side," he blurted, trying to regain authority. The farmer stepped forward, drawing on the courage of his community. "You think that's all it takes?" He looked back at the faces behind him, their resolve radiating in the face of greed. In that moment, voices began to rise. Shouted one neighbor, echoed another. The storm clouds above began to rumble, not just with thunder, but with the energy of a growing movement. The operator, now visibly rattled, stepped back into his machine, his expression shifting from arrogance to uncertainty. On the other side, lightning struck in the distance, illuminating the scene. Nature itself seemed to have chosen a side. Meanwhile, the farmer pushed on, rallying his community. They stood together, united, watching as the operator hesitated, unsure of how to proceed. One farmhand emerged from the crowd, a young woman who had once attended agricultural school. With passion in her voice, she shared stories of how they'd grown together, collaborated, and shared fears and hopes. "This land is woven into our lives," she proclaimed. Her words ignited something deeper. The crowd erupted into chants, their voices mingling with the growing storm, a symphony of defiance that pushed back against the oppressive engines of industry. As the operator called for reinforcements, he realized he had no choice. He might be backed by big money and machines, but this community had heart, and their spirit broke the chains of their fear. The farmer and his fellow neighbors stood firm, a wall of conviction against the tide of corporate greed. The winds howled around them, rain falling in sheets, but nothing could dampen their determination. Moments turned into hours, and as the sky finally opened up, lightning struck not just the field, but through the hearts of those standing bravely in the rain. The farmer bellowed, reminding the group, "This land has provided for us, and now it's our turn to protect it." The community roared back, the passion relentless, and something extraordinary shifted in the air. The operator sat in his machine, frozen, realizing he had underestimated the spirit of the farmer and his people. Their bond was unbreakable. With a final surge of momentum, the farmer spoke straight from his heart. "This isn't just about land, it's about family, friendship, and legacy." The roar of agreement that followed shook the earth. They were ready for whatever came next. They were a force of nature. It was an uphill battle, but they were ready to fight, not just for land, but for everything it represented. The giant corporation may have come with a powerful name, but as the rain poured down, it became clear they had severely underestimated the power of one farmer and the unwavering spirit of the community that rallied around him. And just like the rain that fell heavy but eventually transformed the land, hope flowed through the farmers' veins, fortifying them for the challenges ahead. The sound of heavy machinery echoed across the valley, a harsh symphony of metal and power. The sun shone brightly overhead, illuminating a vast field where green stalks of corn stood tall, resilient against the odds. But for the farmer, this day felt different. He sensed a fracture in the air, a tension brewing just beneath the surface. With every roar of the bulldozer, his heart quickened. They thought it would be an easy job, these corporate giants who had come to lay claim to his land, to bulldoze the dreams of generations. But they didn't know him. They didn't know what he would do to protect everything he held dear. From his porch, he watched as the workers in their pristine uniforms prepared for the day's demolition. They looked so confident, so sure of themselves, and that made his blood boil. The giant corporation wanted to replace the lush fields he cherished with asphalt, but this was not just any piece of land. This was his family's legacy. The farmer Jake could still hear his father's voice, thick with pride, telling tales of the harvest. "This land feeds lives, son," he would say. "It provides more than food, it gives us purpose." Those lessons had woven into Jake's heart strong and unbreakable. He took a deep breath, recalling every struggle, every triumph they had faced. Today would be no different. Just then, a knock at the door startled him. It was his neighbor, Sarah, a fierce woman in her own right, with the spirit of a warrior. She asked, concern etched on her face. "They think they can just come in and take what's ours," Jake replied, his voice steady but tinged with anger. Sarah nodded, knowing the challenges that lay ahead. "We can't let them bully us," she urged. "This isn't just about you." As the two of them stepped out into the sunlight, the bulldozer rumbled ominously, sending vibrations through the ground. Jake clenched his fists, filled with determination. The townsfolk mattered. He could hear the echo of their shared histories, everything they had built alongside their farms, neighbors helping neighbors, raising families in this close-knit community. "The first thing we need to do," Jake began, "is gather everyone." He wasted no time. From the well-worn road leading to his farm, Jake could see his fellow farmers starting to arrive, drawn by the commotion. Old friends, longtime coworkers, and even young faces, those who had grown up listening to the tales of the past, stories that spoke of resilience and pride. They formed a circle, the sun shining brightly on their faces as Jake stood in the center, heart pounding with purpose. "They think they can push us around," he said, each word laden with conviction. "But we are more than just landowners, we are a community." Cheers erupted from the crowd, voices blending into a chorus of anger and hope. Each person standing there had a stake in this fight, and the adrenaline coursed through Jake's veins like wildfire. The bullies closing in on them didn't understand. They didn't get the blood, sweat, and tears that had been poured into this land. The sacrifices that made every crop a triumph. Jake's voice grew louder as he rallied everyone around him. "It doesn't matter how big they are." Suddenly, the thundering of the bulldozer cut through the air again, and a man in a hard hat approached, his face shadowed by the brim of his helmet. "This land has been purchased legally. You need to move along," he said, his tone dripping with arrogance. Jake stepped forward, defiance radiating from his very being. "You think because you've got some papers in your hands you can bulldoze over our lives?" The operator smirked, clearly unbothered. "We have every right to be here." Jake shot back, his voice thunderous. "Progress isn't just about making money, it's about getting it right. This land is our future, our identity. With that, he felt the support of the community swell around him. Sarah took his arm, squeezing it reassuringly. She whispered. That moment felt like a flicker igniting into a blaze. The farmer's heart surged with hope. All those years of toil, every harvest struggle culminating in this single moment of unity. They weren't just farmers in opposition, they were fighters for their heritage. In the distance, they could see more vehicles rolling in, the corporation bringing in reinforcements. Fear threatened to creep in, but Jake took a deep breath and faced the crowd again. This isn't just our fight, it's theirs too, he said, gesturing to the busy farmhouses beyond. That's when Jake decided to reach out to the community at large. He turned to his neighbors. We need more voices, more stories. Every single one of us has a right to this land. The crowd erupted again, fueled by purpose. They marched down the dirt road, their voices rising as they recounted tales of hard work, community, and connection to the land. When they reached the town square, the air crackled with energy. The townsfolk gathered, curiosity pulling them toward the gathering. One by one, people began sharing their stories, small victories, difficult losses, and the laughter that echoed through the fields during harvest time. A sense of camaraderie filled the air. One elder, with a voice roughened by smoke and years, stood up. My father worked these fields before me. He told me stories of the land, how it nourished dreams. Emotions swelled, gripping the hearts of everyone present. Listening to this man, Jake felt a sense of resolve settle like a rock in his stomach. This was bigger than him. It was about the past, present, and future. Newly energized, they spoke about creating signs and pamphlets, using social media to rally support beyond the borders of their small town. There was even talk of a peaceful protest, a march to raise public awareness. The community became a living, breathing entity, a tide of humanity that was unyielding. Days turned into a whirlwind of activity. Signs were painted with bold colors that screamed messages of resistance. Each brush stroke felt like a declaration, a reminder that they wouldn't go down without a fight. With every passing moment, their unity grew stronger. They held meetings, strategizing how to engage the town council and spread the word about the fight for their land. Local newspapers began picking up their story, and soon the narrative shifted. What was once a simple land acquisition began to become a cause. On an overcast morning, the protest day arrived. Jake stood at the front, surrounded by neighbors and allies, a sea of solidarity flowing behind him. The atmosphere crackled with anticipation. As they gathered in front of the town hall, chants erupted like a rapid fire, echoing through the streets. Finally, an official from the corporation arrived, cool and collected, eyes scanning the crowd with a practiced indifference. But the power of unity washed over him. Instead of being merely a group of farmers, they were now activists fighting for their way of life. Jake stepped forward, heart pounding with adrenaline. We are here today to make it clear that we will not be silenced. Our land is not just soil, it is our home. The crowd erupted in agreement, voices weaving together into an unstoppable force. One by one, they stepped forward to speak, stories spilling from their hearts like water from a fountain. Amidst the cheers, Jake noticed the corporate representative gauging the crowd's response. Sweat glistened on his forehead, his confident demeanor starting to falter. For the first time, Jake could see doubt flicker across the man's face. With the media buzzing around, the town hall doors swung open. A town councilperson stepped out, attending to the scene unfolding. We're here to discuss the concerns of our citizens, she said, addressing the crowd, her voice steady. She listened intently as stories echoed around her, a mosaic of life intertwined with the land. Jake saw sparks of change igniting in her eyes. They were gaining traction. As the councilperson finally spoke, her voice carried a sense of reverberation that struck a chord with Jake. The words sent a ripple through the crowd. Days turned into weeks, and press coverage began spreading beyond their small, semi-rural town. Word got out to environmental groups, activists, and even social media influencers, people who were committed to supporting their fight. A movement was born. Meanwhile, the bulldozers sat idle, their ominous rumble stilled by an avalanche of human determination. The corporation started to see the power of community in action. What was meant to be an easy job suddenly spiraled into an uphill battle. The fight was not without its scars, though. Internal tensions flared among neighbors, disagreements sparked, old feuds resurfaced, but in the end, they found strength in dialogue and connection. The soil they fought so passionately to protect seeped into their very beings, grounding them even as they battled against oppression. After several long months, a pivotal meeting was held with the corporation and the town council. Jake and other community representatives listened as numbers were thrown around financial packages, compromise offers, and terms of agreement. Finally, the tension in the air shifted. Jake felt a wave of solidarity ripple through the crowd as they heard the words they'd been waiting for, the agreement to halt the project pending further review. The company offered to meet and discuss a more ecologically aware plan that respected community input. Cheers erupted from the townspeople. As Jake stood watching, he felt pride wash over him. They had shown up not just as farmers, but guardians of their heritage. The enemy they once feared had become a catalyst for growth and solidarity. As the crowd dispersed, exchanging hugs and laughter, Jake realized not just what they had fought against, but what they had fought for. Their connection to the land had brought them together in a way they hadn't anticipated, rekindling lost friendships and strengthening bonds. That night, as Jake walked home, he could see the stars twinkling above, each one a reminder of their struggles, their history. The path ahead might be winding, but every step taken had drawn them closer to understanding their worth, their story, and their rights. He climbed onto his porch, gazing over the fields bathed in moonlight, knowing deep in his heart that they had made a difference. It had been a fight, but more importantly, it had been a journey that proved time and again that even when they thought it would be an easy job, they could rise, fight back, and create a future rooted in resilience, community, and hope. Thunder cracked overhead as the sky darkened, heavy with the promise of rain. On the edge of a small town, a lone farmhouse stood proud against the brewing storm. Inside, a farmer named Tom was gathering his tools after a long day in the fields. But this wasn't an ordinary evening. You could feel tension crackling in the air like the impending lightning. Just as he set the last hoe against the wall, a loud rumble filled the air, not from the storm, but from something far more menacing. Tom rushed to the window, his heart pounding. A convoy of trucks rolled into view, their paint glistening, unsettlingly bright against the backdrop of gray clouds. They were here. Tom had heard the rumors. A corporation with money to burn, armed with heavy machinery, planned to level the fields for a commercial complex. They thought it would be an easy job. They believed that the farmer would simply roll over. But they had underestimated the resolve of one man and the community that rallied behind him. As he stepped outside, the wind whipped around him, carrying with it the scent of rain and something more bitter, fear of losing everything he had worked for. He could see figures emerging from the trucks, clad in hard hats and crisp uniforms, looking at his land as if it was just dirt to be wiped away. Near the gate, he spotted Rebecca, the neighbor who had lived across the road for as long as he could remember. Her hands were on her hips, her brow furrowed. "They're serious about this, Tom." Tom straightened up, the weight of generations pressing on his shoulders. "We're going to fight," he said fiercely. "This land belongs to us. It's been passed down through my family for nearly 100 years. Rebecca nodded, her eyes glimmering with determination. "I'm with you." In a matter of minutes, word spread through the neighborhood. Farmers began to emerge from their homes, faces lined with concern, determination coursing through their veins. It wasn't just Tom's battle, it was theirs too. They all had stakes in this land. As the tractors hummed ominously, Tom called everyone together in his yard, each adult feeling the energy of collective hope overwhelming the fear that threatened to consume them. He urged, gesturing to the rolling fields, "This is our history. Our families toiled to make this happen." Confident nods and murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathering crowd. The farmer's voice took on a rhythmic, passionate tone. "They think because they have machinery and money they can intimidate us, but we are the heartbeat of this community." Armed with determination and fury, the group began brainstorming. Ideas bounced around like sparks in a dry field. Someone suggested pamphlets, another proposed a rally, but Tom had a different idea. What if we reach out to the media? Times had changed, and social media offered a powerful platform. As they started planning, the storm above them grew nearer. But rather than deter them, the thunder felt like a call to action, an echo of their rallying cries. Later that evening, after a day filled with heavy planning, Tom set to work. He dragged a weathered table onto his porch and began crafting signs. The following morning, rain poured down, draping the earth with a fresh cloak of desperation, but also resolve. The farmers gathered at the gate, signs raised high. The convoy rolled in, heavy machines rumbling to life. Their operators gawked incredulously at the makeshift protesting army standing strong in the weather. The lead contractor, a man named Greg, stepped out, his glare cold and dismissive. "You all need to move along. This land is no longer yours," he barked, arms crossed over his chest. Tom stepped forward, the rain mixing with his sweat, pounding defiantly against his skin. "This land has been in my family for generations." The contractors chuckled, an arrogant sound that cut through the rain. "We have all the permits we need. Trust me, you don't want to mess with us." "And maybe you don't want to mess with us," Tom countered, his voice steady as the farmers behind him stood firm, shoulders squared. "We have a history, a community built on love and hard work." The atmosphere changed, the tension thickening like the clouds above. Tom could see doubt creeping into the contractor's eyes. For a brief moment, Greg glanced around, assessing the crowd, measuring their resolve, but he quickly masked it, barking orders to his men. "Let's get moving." But the community wouldn't back down. They remained a steadfast wall of humanity, voices echoing the strength of their anger and unity. They raised their signs higher, chanting, "Save our land." The rhythm became a heartbeat, a reminder of what they were fighting for. Each day brought fresh challenges, but it also brought and deepened relationships among the farmers. Friends turned into allies, lost connections found anew as they shared meals and laughter under the threat of destruction. The fight wasn't just about land, it was about life, legacy, and community. As weeks passed, the corporation tried to outmaneuver them legally, making threats of court actions and fines. But every time they raised their swords, Tom and his fellow farmers matched them with round-table meetings and steadfast dedication. They organized rallies, brought in experts to educate themselves, and shared their message far and wide. One evening, amid preparations for a town hall meeting, Tom stood around the kitchen table with Rebecca and a handful of other farmers. They were exhausted but fueled by an unwavering fire. Rebecca suggested. Tom considered it. They had been so focused on fighting back, they hadn't thought about bringing more voices to the table. Let's try it, but we need to be smart. They compiled a list of local advocates, artists, and even some politicians willing to lend their voices to the cause. One voice in particular stood out, an environmental activist with a large following. It was a power move, and it sparked excitement among the farmers. As the meeting neared, the rainstorm of the previous weeks felt like a distant memory. People began flooding in from neighboring towns, carrying signs and banners, forming an army of buoyant resolve. Tom felt invigorated as he took the stage that night, staring into the sea of kindred spirits eager to fight back. "This is about so much more than our land," he began, his voice clear and strong. "This is about our rights as the guardians of the earth. Together, we can take a stand against giants who think they can trample us down. Each of you matters, your voices matter." Cheers erupted, echoing through the halls. The corporation was starting to feel the pressure. News coverage snowballed and online support surged. Tom received messages of encouragement from all corners of the country. Each notification made his heart swell, knowing they were not alone in this fight. Finally, the day arrived when a final meeting was to be held. City officials, locals, and corporate representatives gathered to hear the concerns of the townsfolk. Armed with stories, statistics, and unwavering resolve, the farmers represented the voice of a community that had stood strong together. Tom took a deep breath as he stepped up to the podium. The room was filled with the tension of anticipation, eyes looking at him, faces showing both hope and anxiety. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "we stand here not just because we love our land." With every word that flowed from him, Tom bore the weight of every farmer who had fought for their home. He could see sparks in the eyes of townspeople who knew the depth of this battle, the laughter shared over meals made from their own crops, the memories forged in the fields. Gradually, he could feel the collective heartbeat of the room vibrating with purpose. And by the time they finished presenting, it dawned on everyone in that room, the tide was turning. The corporation's representatives had grown visibly uncomfortable, exchanging glances as they whispered among themselves, anxiety evident in their body language. At last, the vote was called. The room hung in suspense. Tom held his breath, fingers crossed, an unyielding wave of hope filling him. When the results were announced, a cheer erupted like thunder cracking upon the hills. They had done it. The town had formally rejected the development proposal. The people had spoken, their voices rising like a reflection of the land, resilient, proud, and utterly unyielding. As everyone poured out of the building, hugging and celebrating, Tom felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude wash over him. They had fought for more than just land. They had fought for one another and strengthened their bonds. They had turned fear into activism, doubt into hope, and each challenge had transformed into a stepping stone toward collective resilience. Tom looked out over the fields, now glistening in the afternoon sun. They had reclaimed what they cherished, and it felt like a breath of fresh air. Nature reigned once more, laughter mixing harmoniously with the rustle of the wind through the crops. It was not just a battle won. In that moment, they had found themselves again. They were a community that would stand together, come what may, forever entwined in the unshakable roots of their history, promising that the land would forever thrive. The farmers showed the world that they could fight back and win. The day began like any other under the vast blue sky, with the sun rising over the rolling fields of corn. But then a rumble broke the tranquility, the sound of heavy machinery echoing through the valley. Jake, a farmer who had toiled on this land his entire life, felt a knot form in his stomach. He had heard the whispers, seen the glint of corporate eyes on his land, but today was different. Today they had come. As he stepped out of his weathered farmhouse, the air buzzed with tension. A convoy of trucks rolled down his dirt road, their shiny surfaces reflecting the sunlight like predators in the wild. They had come to clear the land, a foreign company with big plans, and Jake knew they thought it would be an easy job. After all, they'd done it before in neighboring towns, swallowing family farms whole without a second thought. But what they didn't know was that this land was more than just dirt and crops. It felt like the heartbeat of his family's history, the spirit of his grandfather who had tilled it, the laughter of children who ran through the fields, and the sacred memories of every harvest shared around the dinner table. No, Jake wouldn't let them take that away. Jake squared his shoulders as he moved closer to the gate. The bulldozer roared to life, its engine growling like a beast ready to devour everything in its path. He could see the workers climbing into their machines, armed with the confidence of men who believed they were untouchable. But they didn't know him. They didn't know what this land meant to him. Jake shouted, his voice cutting through the clatter of machinery. The workers paused, glancing his way. "You think you can just roll in here and do whatever you want?" One of the workers stepped up, a burly man with an unyielding stare. "Look, buddy, we've got the permits. This is happening whether you like it or not." Jake's chest tightened. He felt a sense of urgency like never before. You can't just bulldoze over our lives. Behind him, he could see his neighbors approaching, a few farmers who had stood by him through thick and thin. They were tired, weary of the fight, but their resolve was written in the lines of their weathered faces. One by one, they stepped forward, positioning themselves beside Jake. This land belonged to all of them, not just him, and they weren't going to back down. "We're here to tell you to leave," said Sarah, a neighbor with a fierce spirit that could rival any fire. Moments passed, the air thick with tension. The lead worker scowled, glancing over his shoulder at the heavy machinery that vibrated with anticipation behind him. "You think you can stop progress? This land is being developed." Maverick, another farmer, stepped up, shaking his head. Progress doesn't mean destroying families. Realization began to dawn, igniting something deep within Jake. They were not just farmers fighting for their land, they were warriors protecting their way of life. He could see the concern flickering in the eyes of the workers who now stood frozen, unsure of which way to go. As the clouds loomed overhead, casting a shadow on the land, Jake sensed the storm brewing, not just in the sky, but within their collective hearts. He felt it tight, and it was time to take action. "Let's gather everyone," he said, determination igniting his voice. News spread quickly through the town. In a matter of hours, faces filled every inch of the small community center. Farmers, families, neighbors, each sharing pots of memories, tales of crops and laughter that resonated with a shared history. Jake felt a surge of hope. There was a strength in numbers, an unbroken spirit that could weather any storm. As they gathered, Jake stood at the front, glancing at the faces of his friends, family, and fellow farmers. "We can't let them take this from us," he began, the emotions rising like the tide. "This land is not just soil, it's part of us." With every word, Jake stirred the hearts of those around him. Stories began to flow of lush harvests and struggles, of laughter shared over dinner after a long day in the fields. As they spoke, he could see a fire igniting in their eyes, a flame of resolve. One farmer named Mark stood up. "They can bulldoze our crops, but they can't bulldoze our spirit." His words sent a wave of encouragement sweeping through the crowd. Plans began to take shape. They'd hold a town meeting, invite the media, share their struggles with the wider world. It was time to turn their fight into a movement. They would gather stories, photographs, everything that painted the picture of who they were, the heartbeat of their community. In the following days, Jake found himself leading a small army of supporters. As the group gathered, he felt empowered, but it wasn't without its challenges. Dissent began to emerge, some voices urged caution. One man whispered, but Jake pushed back. "What if we win? We can't let fear dictate our decisions." He worked tirelessly, organizing rallies, assembling pamphlets with images of their land, their crops, and their families. The community pulled together, sharing food, laughter, and stories, igniting a sense of purpose that resonated across the valley. As support grew, media outlets began covering their story. Interviews went live, articles spread across the internet, showcasing the beauty of their land and the strength of their community. And though the corporation tried to dismiss them, they could feel the tides shifting. People from neighboring towns began to show up, lending their voices in solidarity. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Jake looked out over the fields and felt a sense of pride wash over him. This wasn't just about him anymore, it was about everyone who had ever walked this land. With the rally approaching, excitement bubbled among the farmers. Signs were painted with bold lettering. Each brushstroke was a prayer to the earth that cradled them. On the day of the rally, the energy was electric. Jake stood at the forefront, surrounded by his fellow farmers, their hands clasped together. The marching rhythm pulsed through the crowd, resonating deep into the ground. As they approached the town hall, media cameras focused on them, capturing the sea of unwavering determination. They marched, voices raised in unison. "This is our home." The chants echoed through the streets, growing louder with every step. As they reached the town hall steps, Jake could see it, the faces of people who had come to stand alongside them. The young and old, those who understood the fight and those who wanted to learn. When he took the stage, Jake felt the weight of their collective spirit behind him. "We are the farmers, the caretakers of this land," he declared. "We stand not just for ourselves, but for every family who believes in the power of community." Cheers erupted, filling the air with hope. The energy swirled around him like a whirlwind, amplifying his resolve. One by one, speakers took to the podium, sharing their stories, painting a rich tapestry of life on the land. As the day wore on, something incredible happened. People began to share their own experiences, connecting their stories to the farmers, igniting a fire that spread beyond their small towns. Jake could hardly believe the turnout. They had become a movement, one that spoke truth to power. But the corporation wasn't backing down easily. They employed big lawyers and deep pockets, threatening lawsuits that aimed to crush their efforts. But the farmers stood firm, mobilizing their supporters and remaining strong. They met daily to strategize, channeling the fear into determination. As the days turned into weeks, tension simmered and the fight intensified. They had come face to face with the corporation's representatives, leaders who donned suits that felt alien amidst the muddy boots of the farmers. The meetings were heated standoffs that sent reverberations through their souls. Yet Jake realized something profound. They were fighting not just for land, but for a voice that echoed through time. The laws may be written in the corporation's favor, but the heart of the community was strong. Then a breakthrough came. Under pressure from growing media attention and public support, local officials agreed to a town forum. The farmers had a chance to present their case, to share their stories and speak to the very fears that gripped their hearts. The night of the forum, the town hall buzzed with anticipation. As people filtered in, the farmers set up a slide presentation, rich with images of their land, their families, and their way of life. That night, they would turn the tide once and for all. Jake stood at the front, eyes scanning the crowd. The town officials sat with grave expressions, surrounded by the executives from the corporation, unflinching in their confidence. But tonight, it was about more than just negotiations. It was about bringing humanity back to the forefront. As he started to speak, the air felt electric. This land is not just a piece of earth. It nourishes us, binds us together. The words flowed, passion radiating from every corner of his being. He invited farmers to share their experiences, each voice rising with courage, each story a thread woven into the fabric of their community. One by one, they spoke of loss and hope, of laughter shared under wide-open skies, and the memories of loved ones who had come before. Each story painted the reality of farm life, transforming statistics into living, breathing narratives. The atmosphere shifted, palpable tension now replaced with understanding. Even the cold faces of the corporate representatives softened slightly, caught in the stories unfolding before them. After hours of heartfelt testimonies, the town officials took a moment to deliberate. Finally, they returned to the room, and as they spoke, you could cut the tension with a knife. "We hear you." The applause was deafening. Relief flooded the room as members embraced, some breaking into tears as they realized the power of their collective voice. They'd stood together, unwavering, against the tide that threatened to swallow them whole. In the days that followed, negotiations began. The corporation, facing mounting pressure and a surge of public opinion, agreed to revisit their proposal. While not everything was perfect, compromises were made to preserve the most vital parts of Jake's land. The corporation backed down from their aggressive plans, choosing instead to explore sustainable development that would benefit the community rather than destroy it. For Jake and his neighbors, it was a victory beyond mere land. It was about reclaiming their futures. As Jake walked through the fields one evening, the sun dipping below the horizon, he reflected on the journey. They had faced fear and doubt, but together they had woven a tapestry of resilience that turned their despair into hope. The crops stood tall, swaying gently in the breeze, whispering stories of victory. Heaving a sigh of relief, Jake knew they had more battles ahead, but they had also forged a bond that would unite them through thick and thin. They had fought back, not just to save the land, but to save themselves, their way of life, and their community. In the twilight glow, he vowed to remain vigilant, knowing that as long as they stood together, they could withstand any storm. After all, they were more than farmers now. They were champions, guardians of their legacy. And as the stars began to twinkle above, they sparkled as reminders of every struggle, every triumph, and every heartbeat that pulsed through the land they fought so fiercely to protect. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting golden rays over the sprawling fields of a small town. Dew glistened on the grass, and the air was filled with the sweet scent of earth. This was the kind of morning that promised a fresh start of hope and hard work. But for Jake, the farmer at the edge of those fields, it was the calm before a storm. Just as he poured the last sip of coffee into his mug and stepped onto the porch, a low rumble echoed in the distance. Jake squinted against the brightness, his heart racing as he spotted a convoy of vehicles moving slowly down the dirt road. They were massive trucks adorned with the logo of a corporate giant. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. They had come for his land. He could feel the blood drain from his face, the reality crashing down like the heavy machinery they wielded. This wasn't the first time they had threatened local farmers, but he had hoped it would not reach his doorstep. He watched the familiar faces of his neighbors pass by in their beat-up pickups, their brows furrowed with concern as they slowed to a stop. Sarah, his neighbor, called out as she stepped from her truck, her hands resting anxiously on her hips. "I won't let them take it," Jake replied, steeling himself as he looked across the land that had been nurtured by his family for generations. A few more neighbors joined them, their concern palpable in the air, thick with tension. Tom, an older farmer with years of grit etched into his face, stepped forward. "You know they think this will be easy. They don't realize what they're up against," Jake said, rage igniting within him. As the workers began to unload equipment, a sense of urgency drove Jake to action. He grabbed his phone and started recording. "We need to show the world what they're trying to do. This land isn't just ours, it belongs to the community." The roar of machinery drowned out their voices, but Jake and the others wouldn't be silenced. They gathered together, forming a united front, ready to combat the encroaching threat. This was not just a battle for property, it was a battle for their way of life. Days passed into a whirlwind. Meetings were organized, signs were painted, and the air buzzed with the fervor of each farmer determined to protect their land, proclaim the banners that now dotted the landscape. The farmers started sharing their stories, weaving a rich tapestry of history that echoed through the community and reminded everyone why this fight was essential. Meanwhile, the corporation had its own plans, weaving a narrative that portrayed the farmers as blockers of progress. They countered with advertisements, showcasing the benefits of development, the jobs it would create, and the profits it promised. But what the farmers had that the corporation lacked was heart. As they gathered at the community center for a strategy meeting, the room buzzed with frustration and passion. "They want to spin this as if we're against progress," Sarah said, her eyes ablaze. Jake nodded, his voice steady and sure. "Exactly." And so they set out to tell their stories, sharing photos and videos of their family traditions tied to the land, the harvests, and the generations who had walked those fields. Each face was filled with pride, a proud legacy they were willing to defend. But the fight was not without its trials. Tensions flared as the corporation increased its efforts to clear the land. Workers arrived with their heavy machinery, ready to uproot everything Jake and his neighbors had cultivated. It was a surreal sight, the devastation looming behind them while they stood steadfastly in the present. That evening, darkness began to envelop the land as Jake paced back and forth in his living room. His phone buzzed with messages of support, but fear clawed at his insides. The corporation was powerful and their threats felt real. What if they did go through with it? His heart sank at the thought of seeing his family legacy erased. Jake's unease grew even more pronounced when he received a call from Tom. "They've got lawyers, Jake. This isn't just local anymore. We won't let them bully us," Jake vowed, gripping the phone tightly. As the weeks rolled on, their protests garnered local media attention. News cameras began to show up, capturing the passion of farmers rallying behind Jake. Friendly faces had turned into a movement, a chorus of voices echoing through the valley. They cried out, standing firm even as heavy machinery lurked in the background. Each day felt like a battle as they fought to protect their way of life. A town hall meeting was called, bringing residents together to discuss their rights. The air crackled with anticipation as the crowded room buzzed with the sound of passionate conversation. Jake stood at the podium, his heart racing as he prepared to speak. "This fight isn't just about keeping our fields," he began, his voice steady. "It's about preserving a way of life." The audience erupted in applause, and he could feel their energy surrounding him like a protective shield. Families united in this fight, each one sharing stories of crops, family gatherings, and dreams that had flourished under the sun. As the meeting unfolded, Jake noticed the town officials shifting in their seats, their expressions tense. The representatives of the corporation stood at the back, gloating, confident that they had the money to win any negotiation. But Jake could see the weariness in their eyes, the deepening chasm between them and the community. The town council voted that night, and while the majority wanted to protect their land, the threat from the corporation loomed overhead. They were outnumbered in monetary power, and everyone knew it. But Jake felt a flicker of hope. The tide was beginning to shift. More rallies were organized, each one larger than the last. Signs filled the streets as cameras captured the messages pulsating with emotion. People from neighboring towns arrived, and soon the movement gained momentum beyond what Jake had ever imagined. Social media exploded with hashtags and videos showcasing their strength. One day, after a particularly challenging rally, Jake received an unexpected message. An environmental advocate had taken an interest in their cause, moved by the passion and determination pouring from this small farming community. She agreed to come and speak on behalf of their efforts. Jake could hardly believe it. When she arrived, she carried hope and a newfound energy. Standing in front of the crowd, she spoke of the importance of protecting local ecosystems, of preserving the land for future generations. "You are not just fighting for yourselves, you are protecting an entire community," she declared. Her words resonated deeply, underscoring what they had all felt from the start. The residents rallied around her and the media coverage exploded. Soon, news outlets from far away began to pick up their story, viewing it as a David versus Goliath scenario. Farmers from other regions shared their experiences, echoing their own fights against corporate encroachment. The power of community spirit filled the air. The corporation, sensing the pressure mounting against them, dispatched representatives to negotiate. They offered compromises, some seemingly generous, but those who had fought knew better. They had seen through the veil of corporate rhetoric. They would not be swayed by promises of money or development. In the following weeks, Jake and his neighbors worked diligently to articulate their needs. While negotiations were tense, their unity made them resilient. They decided to gather even more support to invite everyone who cared about their town, about preserving not just their land, but their identity. As they sat around the kitchen table one evening, the atmosphere was filled with determination. "We need to keep the pressure on," Sarah said, her voice resolute. Plans were set in motion for a massive rally, one that would bring everyone from farmers to townsfolk to the epicenter of their fight. Word spread fast, and the night before the event, there was a buzz of excitement in the air. Jake could hardly sleep, his mind racing with thoughts of the next day. Would they finally gain the upper hand? When the day came, the sun shone brilliantly, casting warmth over the assembled crowd. Music filled the air as families gathered, sharing stories, hugs, and laughter. It was a celebration of unity, a loud proclamation that they belonged to this land, and they were not going to let anyone take that away. As the time for speeches drew near, Jake took a deep breath and glanced around at the faces that had become his family. He stepped onto the stage, overwhelmed with emotion. Today is not just about our fight, it's about our family, our neighbors, our future. The crowd erupted into cheers, the sound echoing across the valley, reaching out to anyone who could hear it. The momentum shifted. For once, the corporation seemed to falter, aware that they were surrounded not just by people, but by passion and love for the land. In the coming days, negotiations continued, but the community felt held together by a force much stronger than money. As lawyers from both sides clashed, Jake could see hope blossoming in the eyes of his neighbors. They found strength in their shared laughter, in their stories, and in the memories of generations past that had shaped their lives. Finally, after months of relentless fighting, a breakthrough occurred. The corporation agreed to alter their development plans, prioritizing sustainability and community involvement. They would minimize their impact on the land and preserve parts that had historical significance. When the announcement was made, tears streamed down the faces of many farmers. They had done it. They had fought back against overwhelming odds and succeeded. The air crackled with joy and disbelief, as if the very earth beneath them hummed with gratitude. As Jake looked out across the fields that had once felt so threatened, sunlight spilled over the horizon, bathing everything in warmth. He felt a swell of pride for what they had achieved. But more than that, he felt gratitude for the people beside him who had rallied for a common cause, the neighbors he had known for years and those who had joined them in the battle. They had forged bonds that ran deeper than blood, each connection enriched by the struggle they had faced together. Whenever he stepped onto that land, he would carry the memories of their fight. Every crop harvested would be a testament not just to their labor, but to the spirit of resilience that had woven its way through them. As the sun set that evening, Jake stood at the edge of his fields, letting the gentle breeze wash over him. He glanced at the horizon, feeling a quiet resolve deep within. They had fought against the tide, their determination unfaltering, and from that struggle came something beautiful, a promise that they would continue to protect their home, their legacy, and their community for generations to come. The sun dipped behind a curtain of dark clouds, casting a dim light over the fields. Jake leaned against the porch railing of his weathered farmhouse, surveying the landscape he had tended to for years. The wind, carrying a strange energy, whispered through the corn stalks. It felt like the calm before a storm, and in more ways than one, that was precisely what it was. He heard it before he saw it, a low rumble that grew louder. Curiosity piqued, Jake squinted into the distance, catching sight of the first truck in a convoy rolling down the dirt road. A knot formed in his stomach. He knew why they were here. They thought it would be an easy job, an effortless takeover of a family farm. What they didn't know was that they had underestimated the resolve of a farmer fighting for his home. As the trucks pulled to a stop, Jake's heart raced. The air crackled with tension, electric and heavy. Figures in crisp uniforms climbed out of their vehicles, the corporate logos gleaming like badges of authority. They had come to bulldoze his land for a shiny new shopping center, and they didn't care what it cost. But he did. Just then, Sarah, his neighbor and lifelong friend, pulled up in her truck. She hopped out, her face a picture of worry. "Jake, this can't be happening," she said, glancing nervously at the workers assessing the area. "They don't understand what this land means to us," Jake replied, his jaw clenching. The two stood there, watching as a burly contractor approached, his expression unreadable but his confidence evident. He looked at Jake, dismissively waving a cell phone like a wand of authority. "You need to clear out, we have the permits." "This place is ours now," he said, his tone dripping with contempt. "Not without a fight," Jake shot back, stepping forward, his heart pounding. The contractor laughed, but it was a hollow sound. "Progress shouldn't mean bulldozing families. It's not just about money, it's about people," Jake shot back, the urgency rising in his chest. Word spread quickly through the small community, neighbors pouring into the area, drawn by the commotion. Within minutes, a small crowd gathered behind Jake, their faces etched with worry and determination. Tom, an elderly farmer known for his wisdom, stepped forward, his cane grounding him. "We won't let them erase our history," he said, his voice steady. "This land has fed our families for generations." Fueled by a common purpose, the farmers took a stand. They connected not just as neighbors, but as a community bound by shared histories and dreams. Jake felt that charge, that fire igniting deep within him. This was not just his fight, it was theirs. As the sun slipped lower in the sky, the weight of the moment enveloped them. "We need to tell our stories," Sarah suggested, her eyes gleaming with determination. "Let's reach out to the media." Jake nodded. "That's the plan. We'll show them that they can't just come in and erase who we are." The following days turned into a whirlwind of activity. They gathered at the community center, brainstorming and strategizing. Banners were created and stories were shared, stories of every family and every harvest that had made this place special. They painted signs, ready to take a stand, knowing that their fight needed to extend beyond just words. The night before the rally, Jake lay in bed, restless. Tension coiled in his gut like a spring loaded to snap. He felt the weight of generations on his shoulders, every sacrifice made by those who had come before him. He whispered to himself, doubt creeping in. But then he thought of the land, the memories carved into every inch of it, and he realized that losing wasn't an option. The day of the rally dawned bright and clear. As the farmers gathered, excitement filled the air. Children held handmade signs, their faces painted with joy and defiance. Jake felt it too, a wave of solidarity that surged through the crowd. When they formed a line in front of the bulldozers, it felt like a mighty wall against the encroaching storm. They chanted, the words echoing off the buildings, reverberating through the hearts of every soul present. Jake led the charge, his voice rising above the crowd as he shared stories of his family of laughter, tradition, and love that had flourished in these fields. The tension climbed as the contractor reappeared, flanked by security and armed with an air of condescension. "This is all a waste of time," he sneered, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "This isn't just shouting," Jake responded, stepping closer. "This is a community fighting for what's right. You may have machines and permits, but we have heart." The days turned into weeks, and media outlets began to pick up their story. The farmers of this small town found themselves at the center of a much larger conversation about community and the fight against corporate greed. Support poured in from all over, not just from locals, but from activists and allies who understood the stakes. One evening, as Jake sat on his porch, the weight of the battle pressing heavily on him, Sarah joined him. She handed him a news article featuring their rally, the headline bold and striking. "Look at this," she said, her voice tinged with optimism. He read it through and felt pride swell in his chest, but amidst the hope, a worry lingered. The corporation wasn't backing down easily. They sent lawyers to intimidate and issued empty threats. In a tense meeting with the town council, Jake stood at the podium, ready to share the depth of their struggle. The council members looked skeptical, but Jake knew he had to fight not just for himself, but for every resident. "This land is part of who we are," he began, his voice steady despite the flutter of nerves. "You've heard from us, but we need you to see us. Our families have worked these fields for generations. We've fought through droughts, floods, and economic hardships." As he spoke, he could see the council members shift in their seats, the weight of his words hanging in the air. He poured his heart into that speech, urging them to consider their role in protecting the community amidst corporate interests. Afterward, the atmosphere felt charged. They gathered together, richer in experiences, more determined than ever. Those who once wavered now stood firm. They planned the next steps, drawing on the newfound support from allies who had joined their cause. But the pressure mounted. Meetings with the corporation turned hostile as the lawyers employed more tricks, trying to catch the farmers off guard. Yet every blow brought them closer, forging an unbreakable bond between them. The fear that had once gripped their hearts began to dissolve, replaced by a sense of purpose. Then came the moment that shifted everything. One evening, as Jake was preparing for another town hall meeting, he received a surprise call from a well-known environmental activist. "I read about your fight," the voice on the other end said, filled with warmth. The activist opened doors Jake hadn't even imagined possible. She shared strategies, helped mobilize resources, and connected them with groups who had fought battles of their own. It was the push they needed to elevate their cause beyond the boundaries of their small town. Excitement filled the air as plans for a larger demonstration took shape. This time, not just the farmers, but people from across the region would come together to show solidarity against corporate greed. Jake felt rejuvenated, knowing they would finally get the attention they needed. The day of the demonstration arrived, and the atmosphere bubbled with energy. Banners waved in the wind, colorful and proud. Friends, families, and allies from neighboring communities joined hands, forming a massive chain of humanity that stretched as far as the eye could see. Jake stood at the front, feeling the surge of strength that came from being surrounded by allies. He shouted, the words rising like a phoenix, igniting enthusiasm in the crowd. Their chants rang through the air, unyielding and fierce, "Save our land." The corporation had sent representatives, their faces a mix of arrogance and confusion. They hadn't anticipated the support that had blossomed in the hearts of the community. The crowd formed a wall between the machines that threatened to erase their history and the land they loved. In the weeks following, negotiations ramped up again. With the momentum of public support at their backs, the farmers met with the corporation's representatives, each side bringing its weight to the table. Jake stood firm, maintaining a sense of hope, even as tensions flared. But then something unexpected happened. The backlash from the community had grown so loud and relentless that the corporation announced they would be holding a public forum to discuss their plans. It felt like their efforts were finally being recognized. This was their chance to speak directly to the decision makers. The day of the forum arrived, and the atmosphere was electric. Neighbors filled chairs, their faces alight with determination. Jake's heart raced as he took a seat at the front, ready to voice his story once more. As the speakers took turns at the podium, each one echoed a sentiment that resonated throughout the room: the importance of history, community, and the right to fight for their land. When it was Jake's turn, he stepped up, driven by the love for his community and its history. "This is our land. It holds our stories, our dreams. We're not against change. We want change that involves us. Development should benefit the community, not destroy it," he declared, his voice reverberating through the hall. The crowd erupted in agreement, applause washing over him like a wave. As they shared their experiences, the representatives began to squirm. Finally, toward the end of the evening, a corporate executive, once brimming with bravado, turned to the community. "We hear you," he said slowly, the words heavy. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but for Jake and the others, it felt like a victory, a small but significant step in the right direction. They had shown that community can withstand even the mightiest forces, that their voices mattered, and that they could fight back against what they believed to be wrong. In the weeks that followed, discussions began to shift towards sustainable development. There was more openness from the corporation and the community. Jake felt a sense of relief wash over him, but more importantly, he felt gratitude for the people who had stood beside him through it all. As the sun began to set one evening, casting a warm glow over the fields, Jake took a moment to breathe deeply. He could still hear the echoes of their fight, the chants, the laughter, the connections made. They had bonded over their shared experiences, coming together as a family, more than just neighbors, but a united force standing for what was right. He knew the road ahead would still hold challenges, but whatever came next, he was ready. They had fought back, and they had built something beautiful, a renewed sense of community and a fierce determination to protect their land for generations to come. With renewed hope, Jake glanced at the horizon, feeling a strong sense of purpose course through him. They were farmers, nurturers of the land, and he knew they would continue to fight for what belonged to them, for everything they held dear. They had turned anger into love, and in doing so, they had become far more powerful than anyone had thought possible. The breeze rustled through the tall wheat, golden under the afternoon sun, as Jake wiped his brow with the back of his hand. It was harvest season, the culmination of a year of hard work, a time of labor, but also celebration. Laughter echoed from the barn where his family gathered to prepare for the harvest party. Everything felt right in the world until the unexpected rumble of engines drowned out the joy. He turned and squinted down the dirt road, his heart sinking as the first truck came into view. The heavy machinery behind it gleamed ominously, and he felt that knot tightening in his stomach. Jake had heard the rumors, of course, the corporation eyeing his family's land, looking to buy it up for a new project. But he thought he still had time. But time was up. Called Sarah, his neighbor, her voice breaking through his daze. She appeared on the porch, eyes wide with concern. Jake advanced toward the road, his pulse quickening. The convoy rolled past the gate and came to a halt in a cloud of dust. A man in a crisp suit stepped out, his face betraying nothing but a cool confidence. He said, flashing a predatory smile. "Exciting for you, maybe," Jake replied, trying to keep his voice steady but feeling anger bubbling beneath the surface. The man chuckled, a sound devoid of warmth, as he glanced around at the vast fields. "Let's be clear, this land has already been secured for development. We have all the permits." "Not if I have anything to say about it," Jake snapped, stepping closer. "These fields belong to my family. You think this is just a piece of dirt?" The man raised an eyebrow, amusement dancing in his eyes. "Sentimental, I understand." The wind picked up, swirling dust around them, amplifying the tension in the air. Jake felt the simmering rage of his neighbors at his back. They had been through too much together to let this outsider steamroll over their lives. Behind him, a small crowd was gathering, voices rising. Sarah shouted, her fists clenched. He could feel their collective determination, each heart beating in unison with his. With every flicker of hope, the stranger's smugness faltered just a bit, but then, like a wave crashing back, he regained his posture. "I suggest you talk with your family about this." As he turned away, Jake felt time freeze for a moment. Words of negotiation echoed in his mind, and suddenly the fear struck him. What if they didn't fight? What if they just accepted defeat? He shouted after the man, his voice breaking the air like a thunderclap. The man walked away, no longer interested, and climbed back into his truck. Jake felt the weight of what was happening crash down on him. It was a war, and they hadn't even fired the first shot. The next day, the sun rose in a pale orange haze, casting a muted glow over the fields. As Jake stepped onto his porch and looked out at the horizon, he could feel the heaviness in the air. The threat loomed large, hanging over his family like dark clouds before a storm. "We need to organize," he said to Sarah, who stood beside him, a fierce glint in her eye. She nodded, her expression resolute. "Let's gather everyone. We'll meet at the community center tonight." That evening, the community center buzzed with a feverish energy. Farmers, families, and even young students filled the small room, voices mingling into a symphony of concern. Jake stood at the front, gripping the podium, his heart pounding with every word he planned to speak. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice trembling slightly. "We're facing a threat, one that could change our lives forever. That man who came yesterday, he's not just after land." A murmur of agreement echoed in the room, and Jake pressed on, feeling the fire inside him grow stronger. "We need to fight back and fight smart." The voices rallied around him, each story adding layers to his resolve. Tom, an elder farmer, stood up and spoke of sunsets spent tending to the fields, memories that could never be measured in dollars. "We can't allow them to erase our history," he declared, and the room erupted in cheers. By the end of the night, plans were set into motion. Signs would be painted, a rally organized in the town square. They would write letters to every politician, every ally they could reach. Judging from the energy in the room, Jake felt invincible. But as they left, uncertainty loomed beneath the surface. How could they challenge a corporation that had more money than they could imagine? They were just farmers after all. The rally day arrived, bright and hopeful. Jake felt a sense of pride swell in his chest. They stood united, a wall of humanity against the corporate machine that threatened to crush them. As the crowd grew, he took the makeshift stage, feeling the weight of every pair of eyes on him. Today isn't just about us, he shouted, the energy igniting the crowd into a frenzy. But amid their chants, a sense of dread crept in. Beyond the crowd, he noticed a group of corporate representatives lingering at the edge, observing with cold expressions. Their faces slanted against the warm sunlight like shadows on a sunny day. They had come, doubtless, to intimidate. "We won't back down," he urged, glancing toward the intruders. Their smirk sent a shiver down his spine. Yet, as the rally progressed, those faces shifted from annoyance to contempt. A man stepped forward from the corporate side, his body language oozing confidence. "This is an exercise in futility," he proclaimed, a grin spreading across his face. "You think your voices matter." But Jake wouldn't let that deter him. He shouted back, his voice resonating through the square. Behind him, the crowd roared back, their voices rising like a tide, unyielding and fierce. But despite the energy, a gnawing worry clawed at Jake's mind. How many more rallies would he have to hold? How many more times could they shout before the corporation's grip became too strong? In the coming weeks, their efforts intensified. More letters were written, support grew from surrounding towns, and new faces joined their fight. They rallied in organized strikes, gathered signatures, pleaded for help from anyone willing to listen. But each small victory felt overshadowed by mounting challenges. The opposition hired more lawyers, threatening lawsuits at every turn. They painted the farmers as disruptors, making them seem like the villains in a story meant to showcase progress. Jake spent sleepless nights worrying what all this pressure would do. What would happen if they lost? Would his family's land become another strip mall, another corporate blemish on the earth? The weight of doubt loomed over him like a heavy fog. One evening, after a particularly devastating meeting, Sarah caught him in the barn. She asked, concern etched on her face. Jake paused, the vulnerability making his voice waver. "I don't know if we can win this," he admitted. "Every day feels like we're fighting against a tidal wave." She placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "We fight regardless. Look at everyone who believes in this cause now. They believe in you, in us." As the sun set over the fields, casting long shadows on the ground, he felt a flicker of hope break through the worry. He looked out at the land, at the fields that had raised him, and something ignited deep within him. This was their home, their history, and he would do whatever it took to protect it. Days passed, but the struggles only deepened. The corporation launched a smear campaign against them, pouring money into propaganda that painted the farmers as greedy hoarders. But the community wouldn't back down. Signs began popping up in yards, conversations sparked between neighbors, and a sense of purpose united the town like never before. Then came the day of reckoning. An emergency town hall meeting had been called, and tensions ran high. Jake and his fellow farmers arrived early, feeling the weight of this moment pressing upon them. As they took their seats, murmurs filled the room, anticipation crackling in the air. The corporation's representatives were present, two sleek suits tailored to Project Strength. They knew how to play the game, and today they would likely come out swinging. As the meeting began, the council members took their seats. "We are here to discuss the proposal on the table," the mayor announced, glancing at the corporation. Jake clenched his fists. This was it. Their fight had reached a pivotal moment. The corporate representative stood up, addressing the crowd with a practiced smile. "We are committed to providing jobs and boosting the local economy." But the farmers were ready. One by one, they stood up, voices filled with purpose. A farmer shouted, and the crowd erupted into applause. Jake felt the energy shift, the words spilling forth like an unstoppable flood. "You may offer jobs," he said, voice steady, "but at what cost?" Just then, an unexpected twist shattered the atmosphere. A loud crash echoed from outside. The room fell silent, startled gasps escaping lips as the message blared across a loudspeaker from outside. "Attention!" Their arrival sent shockwaves through both sides of the room. The tension fracture melted into chaos. People moved to the windows, craning their necks to see the commotion outside. It was a showdown, people rallying behind the farmers, determined to make their stance known. Jake could hardly believe what he was seeing. This was not just their fight anymore, it was a movement. He surged forward, heart pounding with exhilaration, ready to join them. But as he stepped outside, he couldn't shake the feeling that they had stumbled into a turning point, one that could shift the entire trajectory of the fight. What would happen next? Would this be the moment they turned the tide, or had they unwittingly stepped into a bigger storm than they had ever imagined? The crowd surged, voices rising in a passionate chorus as Jake's heart raced with the thrill of revolution. They would fight as one, not just for their land, but for a future they wouldn't let anyone take from them. And whatever came next, he was ready to face it. This was just the beginning, the dawning of a battle that would reshape everything they had ever known. A new chapter awaited, and they would write it together.